There's a new tool in Photoshop called Generative Fill AI that allows you to input a piece of content and use generative fill to extend the background, to change the background, to change things within the image. But how does this affect our copyright? Because we've already had conversations where we know anything touched by AI does not qualify for copyright protection. So let's talk to everybody's favorite IP and entertainment lawyer, Tony, to find out more.
My name is Tony Iliakostas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School, and I have an Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok account called the IP Professor that's dedicated to all things intellectual property.
Let's talk a little bit about generative AI and expanding images with that generative AI. Photoshop has released a brand new feature that allows you to input a piece of content of your choice, and then you can expand the background. You can design new things with it using what you've already created to then add or to make it wider or taller. What does that do to the copyright of our image, Tony?
So this is a great question, and I think unfortunately we don't have the best answer, but I think what we do have information-wise from the Copyright Office, from case law, I think can give us some sense of a forecast, generally speaking. So obviously we've talked about it before. The Copyright Office has taken a very stern position on the copyrightability of anything generative AI based, which is essentially that if you generate anything using AI, whether we're talking about artwork, text, any sort of video, any of that would not be regarded as worthy of protection under copyright law because it lacks the human authorship requirement that the Copyright Office has contended is essential to copyright protection. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like, the putting in of a prompt with, let's say, DALL-E, if you went to DALL-E and you asked it to generate an image of, a cat riding down a street on a motorcycle, that obviously the input is not something that I think would generate unique enough artwork as, like, let's say you, the author, actually creating a sketch of, let's say, a cat on a motorcycle driving down the street. So that kind of gets to the heart of the idea expression dichotomy. This is kind of more of like the philosophical approach to copyright. But all that to say, the Copyright Office has been very stern about this. We have recent case law and even ongoing case law that is really touching on these nerve points about whether or not something generative AI based could receive copyright protection or not. What we do know so far is at least that if there is something that contains shades of human authorship and shades of authorship from generative AI, the Copyright Office will only grant the protection to the aspects that were created by a human author. We know this from a recent decision for the graphic novel Zarya of the Dawn, where the Copyright Office was willing to grant copyright protection only for the aspects of the graphic novel that the author, Chris Cashinova, themselves had actually authored. So we're talking about the text bubbles, the arrangement of the story, maybe sort of dialogue, anything like that is something that the Copyright Office said would receive copyright protection. But it's the artwork within that graphic novel that was generated using Midjourney and then touched up lightly using Photoshop. That's what the Copyright Office said. It doesn't meet that threshold of satisfying human authorship. That's not going to get copyright protection. So if we're working off of that as sort of like our central rule statement, if you will, I actually think that that could give us a sense of the copyrightability of, let's say, using generative fill features on Photoshop. So if, let's say, you went down the street and you took a photo of, let's say, the middle of a town square, if you will, you grab that photo, you put it in Photoshop, and then you ask Photoshop to do a generative fill of the other aspects. What would it look like beyond the borders of the photo that you took? If we're going off of the Zarya of the Dawn decision that came from the Copyright Office, the Copyright Office will say that it will only give protection to the aspect of the photo that was actually photographed by the user. The other aspects of it, generative, that were filled using generative AI, that's the kind of thing that probably wouldn't get copyright protection. Now, again, I'm working off of speculation. There could be a world where the Copyright Office says it's not at all going to get copyright protection because it is substantially being authored by a human author. So that's the problem. Unfortunately, we don't have the best guidance and we don't have necessarily sort of like a sliding scale of what the Copyright Office would grant protection for if something has elements of human authorship and generative AI authorship features. We don't know if the Copyright Office, what the Copyright Office's sort of threshold is with substantial human involvement. We don't know if that's looking like 40%, 50%, 51%. None of that has sort of been made readily available or even been brought out into the forefront. So I think the only way we would have some sense of guidance or knowledge of that is as more case law, as more regulations come out from the Copyright Office and from our justice system. But for now, I would say that if you are using generative fill features on Photoshop, tread lightly because
Mhm.
the copyrightability of that asset is looking like 50-50. Either it will not get copyright protection at all, or the aspects that were authored using generative AI are not going to get copyright protection. It's only going to be the source material, the actual photo, that will receive the copyright protection at the end of the day.
So at this point, if you want to hear more about the case that is kind of leading us to some of these conclusions, we've talked about that before. We're going to link that down below for you. And if you're thinking about using a generative fill in the content you are creating, maybe think twice before you do it because we don't have answers yet. If you have more questions, you can drop those down below. Tony's coming back for upcoming episodes, but we also have a full playlist with the legal, ethical, and creative sides of how you can be using AI in entrepreneurship. So you can jump down into that playlist, see what we've already discussed, and then drop your topics that you'd like to see us covered down in the comments below. And if you don't want to wait for us to cover your topic, you can always reach out to Tony on his social media. Tony, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the IP Professor. You can check out my entertainment law podcast called End Scene, where new episodes drop every Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Follow on for daily videos helping you navigate the world of your social media marketing so that you can make this your most profitable year ever by using smart social media that allows you to create luxury time in your life for the things that you love while your business works on your behalf to make this your most profitable year ever. We'll see you in the upcoming episodes.